HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Talk to Me Like I'm Someone You Love, Revised Edition, Relationship Repair in a Flash, by Nancy Dreyfus, Psyd. Read by Gabra Zackman. Preface to the third edition. I've been told by everyone I know in the publishing world, and anyone who knows what publishing is like these days, that being given the opportunity to expand and update one's book is, without a doubt, an increasingly rare and fortunate honor. To put it mildly, I feel incredibly honored, deeply grateful, and occasionally just plain giddy. Yet as someone whose life has revolved around personal growth, this development, while dramatic in itself, feels more like the natural next step in a project that has been recreating itself for more than 2 decades. A relationship rupture may indeed be repaired in a flash, but the journey to selfhood is a lifelong trek. My hope is that the ideas in this book, which largely have to do with choosing transparency when things get tense, will, however slowly, continue to be absorbed into mainstream culture until the day that there is peace on Earth. In the meantime, this new version reflects a few new flashes I have had regarding the maintenance of even friendlier relationships. To appreciate where we are now, first, a quick recap of Talk to Me Like I'm Someone You Love's trajectory. The entire incident is detailed in the introduction, but I created the first flashcard for real life in 1991, when I was rendered virtually mute in a difficult couples session with a verbally abusive wife who happened to remind me of my mother. I handed to her worn-down husband a scrap piece of paper upon which I had written, "Talk to me like I'm someone you love," and whispered to my father look-alike, "Hold it up to her." The woman became flustered, then genuinely nice, and responded to her husband kindly. The rest is history. Over the next 2 weeks, I compiled about 40 handwritten messages with magic marker on lined note cards, bound them with a loose-leaf ring, and asked a few clients to go experiment with their spouses, a word more common then than partners. In 1992, I had Kinko's print up a basic no-frills set, shrink-wrapped with a loose-leaf ring taped to the bottom. My practice at the time was mostly women, and they would come back the week after being given a set and report, "My husband finally heard me." It seemed one of the most helpful cards in the deck, hands down, was "I don't feel heard." I had no entrepreneurial vision, and never thought these cards would leave my office, until I was at a large family gathering where I playfully stopped 2 quibbling relatives with a flashcard. The feat was observed by my brother-in-law at the time. Michael E. Gerber, small business wizard and author of the best-selling E-Myth business books, who shouted out, "It's a book!" and encouraged me to go public. This was a totally foreign idea, so on a lark I started selling the shrink-wrapped version at a therapy seminar, where the idea was picked up by consciousness writer Meredith Gould for a blurb in what was then New Age Journal. More than 3,000 requests to buy copies in less than a month led quickly to the first formal publication of 55 flashcards with a simple introduction, Talk to Me, in a mini-book by Celestial Arts 10-Speed Press in 1993, and then a reprint in 1995. By 2000, that version was out of print, and I was going through enough of my own marital challenges, enough so that until I got my own bearings, I recused myself from offering the world one more piece of relationship advice. Then, in 2006, I curiously began to get a slew of requests for copies of Talk to Me, and discovered that my flashcards for real life had been registered in the Global Ideas Bank and were featured in their compendium, 500 Ways to Change the World. Through a series of synchronistic events, which would be hard to believe occurred in the same week I had heard about my formal recognition, 2 people I had done favors for years before, for which I expected no repayment, reappeared independently in my life, one now a search engine expert, and the other an intellectual property lawyer. The latter wanted to help me get my publishing rights back in my own hands, and the former wanted to educate me on the power of the internet to get my ideas circulated. After more than a dozen other agents personally communicated to me that they loved my thinking but didn't want to involve themselves with a previously published book, Joelle Delbergo had the foresight to see, instead, that this was a retread whose time had come. Sarah Carter, A Tarcher Penguin editor with an amazingly good head on her shoulders could see where annotation majorly enriched things, and suddenly we were heading toward 100 flashcards, each with its own little essay. I was now being asked to come up with more than just the right words. I was being asked to make real to others what was becoming increasingly real to me, that the commonly assumed notion of connecting to another person was actually confusing matters, particularly in a time of conflict. Instead, I wanted to give listeners the conviction that the main thing they needed to concern themselves with was staying connected to their own insides within their partner's force field. At the same time, I was finishing the manuscript for the original version of the book. I was also falling in love with a man who, unlike my ex-husband and the numerous other male mental health professionals who had thus far populated my life romantically and otherwise, was a relative newcomer to the world of conscious communication. Tim was straightforward, unpretentious, very loving, and, making it all possible, curious about his own wiring. However, when we first met, he wasn't so sure that my insistence that the difference between "you're attacking me" and "I feel attacked" was the difference between night and day, was more than some clever therapeutic tactic. The universe was giving me a golden opportunity to learn how to relate to a man operating more like the men that the women in my practice were describing, easily flooded by my ever-available interpretations, sensitive to feeling managed, and new to the world of reflective listening. Before the first edition hit the stores, Tim had taken flashcard number 21, "Right now, I don't need a lecture. I need your love." Crossed out lecture, replaced it with therapist, framed it, and hung it over the bed within easy reach. Now I knew I was in trouble. I had to relate like a real person. I might even have to cut back on my use of the word relate. As this highly personal practicum began interfacing with theory, my professional work with couples, and all pre-existing notions of growth, I could see that my hard-won capacity to be authentic under any and all conditions had its drawbacks with a partner who wasn't always immediately and cheerfully oriented to providing me with a safe container in which to perfect my authenticity. In fact, this partner would have preferred I take golf lessons over working on improving one more communication skill. Nevertheless, this unexpected catalyst, whom I found myself quite drawn to, showed me my capacity to trigger defensiveness in another, and that simply holding him 127% responsible for his own reactivity made me feel pristine, but wasn't adding to anybody's happiness. So the mindset with which I am approaching this updated edition isn't asking one to dilute his or her truth, but to speak it with less intensity and with more awareness of one's partner's vulnerability. I'm just saying be aware of your partner's vulnerability. I'm not saying to make it the point of your compass. For instance, the first new flashcard is number 102. I want to make love, but only if you are liking me. Notice I'm starting with an invitation first, then the self-worthy boundary. Even a few years ago, I might have likely phrased it, "When you don't feel friendly to me, it's hard to want to make love." That would have been a clear, honest, non-belligerent, and non-arguable statement, definitely allowing the sender to convey the state of her soul. But there would have been a hint of admonition to it. While the shift isn't dramatic or relevant to every single flashcard, my newer writing feels a notch less assertive and a little softer and more inclusive. Flashcard number 103 turned out to be, "I'd love it if we could go slow," not "I'd love it if we could slow down." Less assertion, more invitation. Feel the difference? And frankly, a few years ago, it would never have crossed my mind to even have sexually themed flashcards, primarily because I didn't have quite enough of the right field experience to play expert. And I had spent so much time just contemplating whether people would ever use the cards in a car, universally a conflict hotspot, that by the time I might have started on bedrooms, I was done obsessing over one more logistical challenge regarding on-the-spot flashcard procurement. The two new sections in Talk to Me Like I'm Someone You Love are 10, Making Love, and 11, Deepening Trust. They emerged partly as a function of me simply being better able to personally navigate trickier relationship terrain, but they are also the result of the common feedback I got from readers telling me that while they were inspired experiencing how a flashcard intervention could almost always redirect a depressing interaction, It was also true that the book was teaching them how to feel, think, and connect more deftly on their feet without the actual card. And they wanted to know, was there a way to bring Talk to Me's thinking into the realm where disconnects impact sexual dynamics, meaning just about always, and the realm where an apparent relationship rupture is but upstream from a far broader underlying distrust that's been muddying the whole relationship, meaning fairly frequently? So this incarnation opens up the field for using written messages, not just for your rupture du jour, flashcard number 1, this feels awful, can we start again and really listen to each other? But for the problem that's been simmering for a very long time. For example, number 112, I'm terrified of pressuring you, but I'm worried that if we keep ignoring that we haven't made love in forever, we'll be past the point of no return. Or some kind of betrayal that's been outed, but definitely not vaporized. For example, number 123. I know you feel awful, but it's not enough. I need you to really, really know what it was like for me. In other words, I'm more explicit about putting your whole relationship on a healing path. And as Lao Tzu no doubt would have put it if he had been familiar with this book, a journey of 1,000 miles can begin with a single flash. Over the 20 years this project has been reconfiguring itself, it has been an interesting paradox that a profound healing journey could begin with a written message composed by neither you nor your partner. It has not infrequently been noted that I am encouraging people to be sincere and thoughtful. Yet how can that be, since I'm giving them the lines? I've grappled with this on a number of levels, and have come to an important discovery about the purpose of this book. Talk to Me Like I'm Someone You Love is both first aid for a painful interaction and a manual for staying true to oneself when it might seem impossible. It can help make it safe for you to be transparent and let you speak from your heart without distracting voice tones. And it fortunately turns out that I totally lack the power to make you insincere. Because appearances to the contrary, this book isn't really telling you what to say after all. It is only giving you permission to remember who you really are, and trusting that you'll figure out how to take it from there. Nancy Dreyfus, Psyd, Wynwood, Pennsylvania, July 2012. Introduction. What you have here in this book is a very helpful, practical, and sometimes magical tool that can move you and a loved one in a much kinder direction when you are stuck in an unhappy spiral of arguing, defensiveness, or just ordinary terrible listening. The idea behind this book is rooted in a piece of basic common sense. No matter what form the strain in your relationship is taking, be it jumping down each other's throats, nitpicking, walking on eggshells, or endlessly revisiting an ancient grievance, it will be near impossible to begin to solve your problems if the energy between you and your partner feels more unfriendly than friendly. And as a psychotherapist specializing in couples therapy, as well as the veteran of a 20-year marriage, I have noticed something about the way words are used or not used to make this shift. If a couple is unable to make contact in a way that feels genuine, there are virtually no words that can fix what's wrong. Over and over, we can try to hammer our point home or make nice for the sake of peace. And over, no matter how articulate or forceful or even compliant we are, the longing for connection remains until it is, at least, recognized. Sometimes this is for 20 minutes. Sometimes it is for years. Sometimes, sadly, never. Whether it gets expressed directly or not, the continued experience of feeling unheard and unseen leads to rage. And I can assure you that few of us are exceptional at maintaining an atmosphere of friendly mutuality when we're feeling threatened. I created Talk to Me Like I'm Someone You Love for couples, and sometimes parents and children, to transform unproductive, mean, or just plain crummy interactions into moments of connection. I like to see this book as a first aid kit for swiftly generating goodwill and restoring intimacy in exchanges that have gone off course. It contains 101 of what I've come to call flashcards for real life, frank, non-defensive messages that have the power to quietly reverse the course of a difficult interaction by going right to the heart of feeling connected, These messages work because one person has made the momentous choice to redirect the ongoing tension they are experiencing with another person from the content of the interaction, parenting, money, sex, how could you have forgotten to pick up the prescription, etc., to the context. This is the real arena, how the two of you are treating each other in the moment. In order to explain in more depth how this book works, let me tell you the story of how I came to create it. Over the years, I've worked with hundreds of couples as well as individuals in relationship, and watched the stunning ease with which partners get derailed in their attempts to connect and sustain connection. I've watched couples miss over and over again what marital researcher John Gottman, Ph.D., calls each other's bids for connection. I've watched women explain in precise detail to their husbands what felt so off to them in their husband's approach, and still not feel much closer at the end of this impassioned sharing. I concluded that an important key to repairing a rupture in connection was deepening levels of vulnerability. So I would coach, or ideally inspire, partners who were having an upset to drop down to a deeper level of internal sensing and share with their loved one when they were feeling invisible, disrespected, lectured, belittled, invaded, bullied, shamed, unappreciated, ignored, unrelated to, trapped, humored, or simply unheard. Usually this diffused tension considerably, particularly if both partners shared and both felt received by the other. Yet I also couldn't help but notice that this diffusing of tension didn't always lead to a warm, tender feeling of emotional closeness. A couple might feel relieved that peace was being restored, that their partner was no longer upset with them, that at last their previous reactivity made some sense to their loved one. But it didn't always lead to a hug, either a physical one or an energetic one. Partners could get high marks in processing a conflict, and then go their separate ways and not really feel the special closeness they had hoped would emerge from their sincere clearing. At a time when I was fascinated with the enormous gifts of intimate communication, as well as sensing some way that words weren't always enough, I had a couples session with one of the most critical wives and emotionally battered husbands I had ever worked with. Through what I can only call divine intervention, or perhaps God's peculiar sense of humor, the particular couple in my consulting room also happened to be sent from central casting to replay the roles of my parents. As I had witnessed countless times in my own childhood, this woman was unrelenting in her criticism of her increasingly inarticulate, emotionally withdrawn husband. I remember the wife smirking and faulting her husband for an asinine business decision. Quickly after, in what clinically would be called my counter-transference reaction, I felt myself go numb in the familiar way I did as a child. I was all but directionless as to how to proceed with my clients, and felt unusually incompetent as a therapist. More as a last resort than an intentional therapeutic act, I scribbled on a scrap piece of paper in my office, "Talk to me like I'm someone you love," and whispered to the near-mute husband, "Hold it up to her." The husband did this, and within seconds the wife softened, truly startling both her husband and me when what came out of her mouth was, "I haven't been very nice, have I? You deserve better from me." The husband sat straighter in his chair, embodying the self-respect his message carried. He didn't quite smile at her yet, but when he looked his wife in the eye, for the first time I had ever seen, it was without fear. Within minutes, the ancient power differential between the partners shifted, and a realer, gentler, and strikingly more mutual connection began emerging in front of everyone's eyes. Soon the two of them were focusing on some decision they had to make regarding one of their kids. They looked like they were actual friends and equals. Why these flashcards work. I felt what I had witnessed was an answer to a prayer. There was some special power in a written message to heal a relationship rupture, but what was going on, I wasn't exactly sure. Over the past decade, as I have worked with more and more couples and have understood more about my own reactivity, I have come to understand it a bit more. Let's start with a question. If being in a warm, intimate space with a loved one is so desirable, feels so good, and is often the experience declared to be, arguably, the most wonderful feature of human existence, why is it that so often even a very small thing can disrupt the good feeling between a couple and make it so hard to get back to it? Why is it that even a minor disagreement, let alone a full-scale fight, can be so hard to repair? Why is it that sometimes your partner can genuinely say, "I'm sorry," and you can hear the words, know he or she means it, and still not feel as relaxed or safe with them as you did before they, say, interpreted a lost sales receipt as saying something significant about your lack of responsibility, or before you made a smart-ass remark that you thought was so witty it wouldn't leave your partner feeling small and devalued, but it did, before you were questioned about something, almost anything, with that tone in your partner's voice. Think of all the times you and a partner were happily anticipating a special evening, and by the time you got in the car and were heading for the restaurant, it was already less than relaxed between you. Consider Laura and Michael, who had been looking forward to going out to a 9th anniversary dinner. "We were supposed to have a special evening together, Michael, just the two of us, and you had to go run and answer your cell phone," pleadingly. "It's our anniversary." "Laura, we have the whole evening ahead of us. You know I want to be with you. I made the reservation weeks ago," mild irritation in his voice. "Why do you have to focus on one little thing and ruin everything?" "I've ruined everything. I'm only telling you how I feel. If the plan is to be close tonight, do you think you could listen to how I feel? If you really cared about our evening, you never would have picked up the phone in the first place." "Why don't you ask me why I picked up the phone? That might show caring about someone's feelings other than your own. Laura, you know how precarious things are between Terry and me at the office. Why can't you trust that I picked up the phone for a good reason?" "But it's always a good reason. Why can't you simply appreciate how much it bothers me that we never seem to have time together without an interruption? It feels like you would rather win a point with Terry than just be with me." "Now I'm irritated. Stop with the analysis, Laura. If you weren't so insecure, you could allow me taking one brief call without falling apart." "Oh, really? If you weren't so insecure, you could hear the phone ring and not have to check whether your world was falling apart." Do couples therapists make house calls? How does a simple moment get so complicated? How could a well-intentioned romantic evening turn sour so fast? Why can't Laura stop pushing? Why can't Michael just see that she's hurt? Why is each so hell-bent on proving how insensitive the other is? Why is this downward spiral so hard to stop? We'll get back to Laura and Michael in a moment, but first a little background perspective to help make sense of their spiral. For starters, feel into this idea. We are never upset for the reason we think. Allow yourself to consider where this statement might be true. We are never upset for the reason we think. Many years ago, when I was staying with a friend who was having a party, I felt that she became unduly upset because I accidentally left my makeup case in a bathroom, a room she, admittedly, had asked be kept pristine. Inwardly, I rolled my eyes and implied she was being an unreasonable taskmaster. I mean, get real, it's just a makeup case. People keep makeup cases in bathrooms. Closer examination uncovered that I also felt hurt that she didn't appreciate the cleanup job I did do, felt anxious that she was likely remembering all the other past times I had been less than impeccable, felt a bit depressed that this was happening at all, and wondered what it said about our relationship, and felt shame that she had made a simple, heartfelt request and I had screwed up. At one level, my eye-rolling and pointing to her rigidity were not unreasonable responses to her disdain, only they were defensive, masking an extensive emotional underground. And no doubt, on her side, underneath her surface disapproval were feelings about not being taken seriously, feeling ridiculed by me and feeling disappointed that she couldn't just trust me to do what she asked. Add to the picture that these underground feelings are almost always rooted in still potent, unmet childhood needs, to be seen, heard, affirmed, and treated as precious. I could have sincerely apologized for forgetting the makeup case, but that would have been inadequate, given that what my friend needed to hear was a deeper understanding of the meaning of the incident. Rightly or wrongly, some part of her felt not taken seriously and somewhat powerless with me. Even if I had made this empathic leap, a milestone in itself, how well could I have truly conveyed that empathy when a part of me was still feeling belittled by her focusing on an oversight, and not trusting that she could see my humanity coexisting with my more casual approach to housekeeping? If you think about it, it's amazing that any two people make it through any mid-range upset, let alone a full-blown fight. Sadly, this is why there is such an epidemic of relational discord on the planet. not to mention perpetual global warfare. Let's go back to our anniversary couple, Laura and Michael. We can see how quickly two well-meaning people who were looking forward to a romantic evening can get off track. In the throes of their interaction, it's apparent that a part of Laura is convinced Michael isn't as invested in their time together as she is, and interprets his taking the phone call as evidence. Michael is hurt that Laura neither sees his good intentions nor seems interested in what is going on in his world. Michael cannot see that Laura is hurt and worried. Laura cannot see Michael's caring and need for her to understand that his concern with a work situation doesn't diminish his desire to be with her. But from the "we are never upset for the reason we think" standpoint, a case could be made that Laura's hurt might be something far greater than Michael not focusing sufficiently on their time together. That Michael's behavior is, in fact, evidence of a more secret, pre-existing fear, that she's not worth being given sustained attention in the first place. It's this anxiety about her basic value, something far more fundamental than her value to Michael, that could well be fueling her relentlessness. Furthermore, when Laura initially registered upset that he took the call, Michael didn't immediately respond, "Honey, I can totally see why you might have worried I was going to get all tied up with work on our anniversary, and you would have every reason in the world to be upset with me if I did that." This would have gotten everything back on track, not to mention establishing Michael as the most conscious male of the decade. Why? Because he would have given Laura what all of our wounded parts, and many of our healthy parts, crave. The experience we often didn't get enough of in childhood, the experience of feeling felt by a loved one. If Laura had had enough of feeling felt when she was younger, she would have had the self-worth to experience the minor interruption by Michael as an annoyance, not a catastrophe. She might have acknowledged her annoyance playfully by saying something like, "Okay, Buster, you can take the call, but for every minute on the phone you have to massage me for 2 minutes." The annoyance is registered, and the energy stays friendly. Ruptures between couples often get superficial healing because apologies and acknowledgments are offered, oftentimes sincerely. "You are right. I shouldn't have picked up the phone." But they don't actually hit the mark. They don't leave an upset partner feeling felt, conveying a message that their being upset makes sense to the other. Often this has to do with partner A acknowledging the impact of his or her behavior on partner B, something far more meaningful than just acknowledging that the behavior itself was unwise. Let's not make Michael carry more of the responsibility here than is his. Laura didn't do her part in allowing herself to be better felt, such as sweetly expressing, "Listen, my anniversary mate, could you just appreciate that your picking up the phone triggered me?" Because she didn't, we now have another unspoken issue in the space. I feel unimportant when you don't acknowledge your impact on me. Underneath that is another, deeper secret fear. There must be something wrong with me if I can't get the people who matter to me to see their effect on me. So I must not really matter. Michael can apologize all he wants and offer a stream of assurances, but he still doesn't have a clue that what's now percolating in Laura is far afield from the ostensible subject, allowing one-on-one time to be interrupted by a phone call. And keep in mind, so far, we are just dealing with Laura's underground psychological terrain, and probably only a segment of it. Michael brings his own universe of pre-existing wounds to the table, expectations of criticism, doubts of whether he can get it right, worries of whether he can truly please a woman, and pain that he is loved more for what he can give another than just for himself, and so on, and so on. But before I give you a bit more theory, let's go to the practicum. Let's revisit Laura and Michael's parting shots. "But it's always a good reason. Why can't you simply appreciate how much it bothers me when we never seem to have time together without an interruption? It feels like you would rather win a point with Terry than just be with me. Now I'm irritated. Stop with the analysis, Laura. If you weren't so insecure, you could tolerate me taking one brief call without falling apart." "Oh, really? If you weren't so insecure, you could hear the phone ring and not have to check whether your world was falling apart." Now imagine that one of our defensive duo happens to have a copy of this book, goes to flashcard number 2, and it says, "This feels awful. Can we start again and really listen to each other?" Imagine the sniping ceasing and the defensiveness gone. Perhaps they smile at each other a bit sheepishly, but their affection is real. Imagine the conversation about their evening out resuming, only this time with an infusion of tender.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?